The series unfolds with a genuine tale set in a quiet Texan town during the year 1977. Candy resides alongside her husband, Pat, and their two sons. In the close-knit community, where everyone knows one another, residents share the same church, celebrate holy occasions together, and savor weekends as a unified community. One day, as Candy guides her daughter in the delicate art of piano playing, an unexpected interruption occurs. The doorbell rings. Stepping through the threshold is none other than Jackie, the priest who oversees Candy's congregation. Jackie and Candy share a deep bond, a friendship so strong that she feels comfortable confiding in Candy about her recent divorce. Jackie is overwhelmed with sadness, her spirit heavy with the weight of this life-altering event. Amid Jackie's anguish, Candy becomes a pillar of support. With empathy and wisdom, she encourages her to view this moment not as an end, but as a new beginning, a diverging path leading to a different destiny. The next day, everyone gathers in the church to play volleyball, and we see the couple, Alan and Katie. During the match, Candy falls to the ground, where Alan rushes to help her. So Candy looks at him with a strange look. After the match, Candy tells her friend Sherry about her feelings towards Now and that she wants to enter into a relationship with him because she likes his smell. Days pass, and she keeps thinking about Now all the time and sees her husband's dry treatment of her, devoid of feelings, and feels that she is performing her marital duties to the fullest without any compensation. After a while, everyone is in the church, and Candy decides to wait. She sits in his car and tells him that she likes him, and that she wants to have a relationship with him. Alan doesn't say a word. One day, Jackie shares the news of leaving the town. The telephone rings, jolting the room to life. Candy answers and discovers that it is Alan on the line. He extends an invitation for lunch. Candy's heart dances with joy, and she promptly accepts. Seeing her elation, Pat can't help but inquire about the caller's identity. Candy confesses that Alan is someone she intends to pursue a relationship with. Jackie, taken aback, expresses her disapproval, deeming Candy's actions as morally wrong. In response, Candy says that she yearns to live a life of daring choices, especially since her marital obligations have become unsatisfying. Jackie, though conflicted, recognizes that Candy has made her choice and decides not to further dissuade her. Lunchtime arrives, and Candy makes her way to meet Alan. They sit down to discuss the relationship they envisioned. Then, one day, they arrive at a pivotal juncture where they decide to establish the parameters for their relationship. The most pivotal condition they set is that neither of them must harbor a love for the other. In addition, they solemnly agree to maintain the utmost secrecy. They choose a specific day as the starting point for their journey. Candy takes charge of selecting the hotel, and her heart pounding with excitement, she dials Alan's number. Alan, gripped by nervousness, acknowledges the call and soon arrives at the chosen hotel. They sit down to enjoy the meal, engaging in conversation that is a blend of anticipation and excitement. As their connection deepens, they make plans to meet again on another day. Candy and Alan's relationship persists, growing stronger and enduring the test of time. The day arrives when Jackie announces her departure from the church, marking the beginning of her journey. The entire community comes together to celebrate her, bidding her a heartfelt farewell. Among the attendees is Katie. A sense of unease settles over her, prompting her to observe the subtle glances exchanged between Alan and Candy. As time continues its inexorable march forward, Candy's secret liaisons with Alan persist, stretching into days and months. During this period, she can no longer deny that her feelings for him have deepened, blossoming into love. Simultaneously, Pat, her husband, senses a growing distance between them. In a desperate attempt to bridge the emotional gap, he flirts with Candy, but her heart remains unresponsive. Her conscience, however, begins to reproach her for her actions. As the due date for Katie's pregnancy approaches, Alan makes a heartfelt request. He implores Candy to refrain from meeting for the next month as he needs to be by Katie's side during the childbirth. The momentous day finally arrives, and Katie gives birth to a beautiful baby girl, a moment of jubilation for everyone involved. Candy puts on a facade of happiness, concealing her inner turmoil. In light of the turmoil their relationship has caused in Alan's marriage and his distress over Katie's emotional state, Candy rejects the idea of ending their relationship. Alan, recognizing that their affair was initially an attempt to fill the gaps in their respective marriages, acknowledges that these voids have only grown wider. Together, they decide to seek help from a marriage counselor, a decision made with hesitation and apprehension. After spending some time away from the city, Candy reunites with Alan and inquires about the status of his marriage. To her surprise, she learns that he and Katie have reconciled and are in a much happier place. Candy senses a palpable change in him, witnessing the happiness in their eyes and the renewed closeness they share. However, a few days later, Alan meets with Candy to bring their secret relationship to an end. Alan has decided to focus on his wife and children to ensure that Katie does not feel neglected. This revelation leaves Candy deeply distraught, prompting her to cut off contact with him. In her time of emotional turmoil, Candy turns to her friend Sherry for solace. She confides in her about the profound sense of rejection she feels. In an attempt to lift her spirits, Sherry suggests they embark on a joint project, capitalizing on their shared skills in decorating and painting houses. Though initially uninterested, Candy ultimately embraces the idea as a means of regaining a sense of self-worth. Candy attempts to maintain her resolve and avoid contacting Alan, but her inner weakness eventually compels her to reach out to him. It's during this time that Elaine, an acquaintance, informs her about Katie's benign chest tumor. Concerned, Candy decides to visit Katie. At the end of the visit, Alan accompanies Candy to her car and discusses the marriage counseling he and Katie have attended. He suggests that Candy and her husband, Pat, might consider doing the same. Meanwhile, Katie watches them from a distance, harboring suspicions about their interactions. Later that evening, Candy proposes that she and Pat undergo marital counseling together. Pat eventually acquiesces to her decision, recognizing her desire for personal growth and improvement. Together, they embark on the journey of marital counseling in pursuit of a happier and more fulfilling relationship. In the wake of their marital counseling, Pat fabricates his feelings towards Candy, concealing his hurt and disappointment. Candy, however, is elated by his apparent change and feels a renewed sense of hope for their relationship. Her spirits lift, and her emotional state improves. Upon her return from counseling, Candy decides to channel her energy into her project with Sherry and prioritize her commitment to her husband and children. Life appears to be moving in a positive direction. One fateful day, Pat stumbles upon Alan's love letter to Candy while searching through her drawer. Shocked and disheartened, he grapples with the revelation of her betrayal. Filled with doubt and uncertainty, he turns to Sherry, seeking answers about the status of Candy's relationship with Alan. Convinced that their affair has ended, he implores Sherry to keep this secret from Candy and extract a promise from her to do so. Sherry contacts Candy, delivering the devastating news that Pat has uncovered her betrayal. Candy is stunned and spends the day and night fraught with fear and guilt. Suddenly, a letter from Pat arrives, accompanied by a bouquet of roses. Overwhelmed with remorse, Candy breaks down and apologizes to him for her actions, vowing never to repeat her mistakes. Together, they decide to travel and embark on a honeymoon, seeking a fresh start. As the holiday season approaches, Candy decides to prepare food for the church. She also plans a gesture of goodwill by visiting Katie, taking along her daughter, and spending the holiday together at the cinema, seeking to rebuild the bonds of friendship and community that had been strained by her past actions. The situation takes a terrifying turn when Candy visits Katie's house and is met with an uncomfortable reception. They sit down, and Katie, with a stern demeanor, implores Candy to answer her questions truthfully. She directly asks if Candy is currently in a relationship with her husband, Alan. Candy firmly denies any such involvement, but Katie presses further, asking if they had a relationship in the past. At this point, Candy confesses to their prior involvement. Suddenly, Katie falls silent and requests that Candy wait for her. She disappears into the house, leaving Candy in a state of unease. When she returns, Katie is holding a large axe, sending a wave of terror through Candy. In a desperate attempt to defuse the situation, Candy reassures Katie that their past relationship is over, and they are no longer involved. Gradually, Katie's agitation subsides, and she sets the axe aside. She instructs Candy to leave and take her daughter away as well. After changing her daughter's clothes, Katie's mood shifts, and she becomes despondent. Candy attempts to console Katie, offering a comforting pat on the shoulder. However, Katie's emotions escalate once more, and she retrieves the axe, striking Candy on the head with it, and her toes as well. Injured and in shock, Candy makes her way to her car, blood still trickling from her head. Upon returning home, she endeavors to treat her wounds. She removes her clothes, washes them, and opts for sportswear to conceal her injuries and identity, haunted by the traumatic encounter. Candy, having arrived late to church, offers an excuse for her tardiness. She explains that after visiting Katie, she had gone shopping to purchase New Year's cards. She shares the same fabricated story with everyone, ensuring that nobody suspects she has spent all her time at Katie's. On the other side of town, Alan grows increasingly worried as he repeatedly calls his wife, Katie, receiving no response. As the hours pass and midnight arrives, his concerns escalate, prompting him to reach out to the neighbors. He suggests that they check whether Katie's car is parked in front of the house. Concerned, the neighbors hastily make their way to Katie's house, eager to determine what might have transpired. Upon entering the residence, they are met with the heart-wrenching cries of Katie's infant. Tragically, they come upon Katie's lifeless body, bearing the gruesome wounds inflicted by an axe. The following day, Alan reaches out to the neighbors, desperate to learn what happened to his wife. Unsure of how to respond to his inquiry, the neighbors decide to tell him that she was killed by a bullet. Alan, on the other end of the phone, collapses under the weight of this horrifying news. Overwhelmed by the guilt and realization that she might be responsible for Katie's death, Candy receives a call from Alan. He relays the devastating news, and Candy's world shatters as she comprehends the gravity of the situation. The police launch an investigation into the case, meticulously examining the crime scene for any evidence. They discover the severed little fingers, which leads them to suspect that the killer may be a child or a woman. Armed with this critical piece of evidence, the police begin summoning all individuals who had seen Katie on her last day and interrogate them. The following day, it's Candy's turn to be summoned to the police headquarters. She recounts the events of that day, emphasizing that her meeting with Katie was friendly and uneventful. She explains how Katie took her daughter after she had changed her clothes, and that nothing else of significance occurred during their interaction. During her police interrogation, Candy is asked about the shoes and clothes she was wearing on the day of her visit to Katie. She provides a detailed description of her attire, explaining that she had changed clothes later. Alan, after returning home, is summoned by the police for his interrogation. They inquire about anyone who had met his wife on the day of her murder, and he informs them that he only knows about Candy's visit, during which she took their daughter after changing her clothes. He chooses not to reveal his relationship with Candy during this questioning. The police express their gratitude and assurance to Alan, promising to do their utmost to apprehend his wife's killer. Alan finds sleep elusive, his mind troubled by the secrets he's kept. In the quiet of the night, he dials the police and confesses that he had concealed something important about his relationship with Candy. Meanwhile, at Candy's home, she rises early and diligently prepares breakfast for her family. Her husband observes her unusual behavior, noting her anxiety and nervousness. though he remains unaware of the turmoil she's embroiled in. During his continued interrogation with the police, Alan divulges that his involvement with Candy had been a brief and inconsequential fling. He further elaborates that Candy had mentioned the idea of divorce once in his presence, but clarified that such a decision would only materialize when her children grew older and more self-sufficient. Alan emphasizes that this divorce matter does not currently impact their lives and reassures the police that Candy has no intention of residing with him. During his police interrogation, Alan is directly asked if he was the one who killed his wife, and he vehemently denies any involvement in her murder. When the police inquire if Candy is the culprit, he also rejects this possibility. Nevertheless, the police declare him as suspect number 1 until his innocence can be proven. Following Alan's questioning, Candy is summoned again for the interrogation. The police approach the matter indirectly, asking if her husband might have been involved in an affair similar to Katie's. Candy denies any knowledge of such an affair. However, the police proceed to ask her directly if she is currently having an affair with anyone. Candy, fully aware that the police are already aware of her affair with Alan, decides to reveal the truth about their involvement. When directly asked if she was the one who killed Katie, Candy responds confidently and without any signs of fear or trembling, asserting that she did not kill her. The police, however, notice something unusual in her demeanor during this exchange. Her lack of fear in responding to such a serious accusation raises suspicions, as it diverges from the typical behavior of an innocent person. It becomes apparent to the police that there may be more to Candy's story, possibly involving her in Katie's murder. Under the pressure of the police officer's accusations, Candy steadfastly maintains her innocence, denying any involvement in Katie's murder. The officer continues to press her, expressing his disdain for her involvement with a married man and insinuating that she might have killed his wife. Despite the mounting pressure, Candy remains resolute in her denial. The other police officers join in the questioning, attempting to coerce a confession from Candy, but she does not waver in her stance. Subsequently, the police search her car but find no incriminating evidence. They then instruct her to surrender her shoes, intending to match her fingerprints with those discovered at the crime scene. After the fingerprint analysis, which yields no conclusive evidence, the police release Candy but inform her that they will continue their investigation until they find sufficient evidence to implicate her in the crime. Faced with the gravity of the situation, Candy decides to seek legal representation and contacts a lawyer from her church named Don. Don, the lawyer, reassures Candy that her case appears to be straightforward, as he is convinced she is not the killer. Simultaneously, the police officer contacts Alan to inform him that Candy is now a suspect in Katie's murder. Alan, burdened by guilt, calls Katie's family and confesses to his relationship with Candy, shocking them with the revelation. News of Katie's murder, allegedly involving her friend Candy, begins to circulate throughout the town. Candy, overwhelmed by frustration and panic, distances herself from her children. She also contacts her lawyer to provide updates, and he advises her to be forthcoming with any information she might be hiding, as it could help in her defense. In a moment of intense emotional turmoil, Candy unexpectedly bursts out with a confession to her lawyer, Don. She adamantly declares that Alan is not the killer. Instead, she admits that she is the one who killed Katie. Her revelation leaves Don startled, and he swiftly closes his office door before returning to his seat, urging Candy to recount the entire story. Upon telling him what happened, Don advises her not to disclose this information to anyone else and recommends seeking assistance from a criminal defense lawyer, as he feels unable to handle such a case. Despite his suggestion, Candy insists on having someone she trusts by her side. Don agrees to help to the best of his abilities and instructs her to deceive the polygraph test. The following day, both Alan and Candy undergo lie detector tests. Candy confidently and accurately responds to all questions until she is queried about the events that transpired in the room where Katie died. At this point, she refuses to answer, citing her right to remain silent and not incriminate herself. She abruptly leaves the test and returns home. The next day, Dawn contacts Candy, informing her that an arrest warrant has been issued against her. He advises her to surrender herself to the police before they come to apprehend her. Dawn also suggests that she speak with her husband about providing the $10,000 bail required to avoid incarceration. Candy, accompanied by her friend Sherry, goes to the police station to await her husband, Pat, who is bringing the bail money. However, they receive the news that the district judge has refused to imprison Candy and will hold off on the bail decision until the following day. Dawn, her lawyer, speculates that the judge might be using this case to assert his authority and make it a high-profile matter for the media. Fueled by the challenge and intrigued by the complex case, Dawn eagerly accepts the role of Candy's attorney. He instructs his assistant to accompany Candy to the district prison, where she will spend one night. There, photographs capture the visible bruises on her body, the wound on her head, and the scars on her toes. The next day, Candy meets with Dawn in his office. He outlines a plan for her defense, which includes several key changes in her appearance and demeanor. First, he advises her to lose weight to the point where she appears weak and incapable of wielding an axe. Second, he suggests changing her hairstyle to convey an innocent and non-threatening image. Lastly, he recommends dressing modestly and adopting a demure demeanor. Dawn aims to present Candy to the media in a way that can shape public opinion and work to her advantage in the case. As part of her defense strategy, Dawn advises Candy to contact her church friends who were present on the day of the murder. She instructs them to testify that they only remember the clothes she wore at the church that day after her visit to Katie's house. Dawn takes a proactive step by calling the church pastor and requesting that he deliver a sermon that indirectly praises Candy, highlighting her qualities of love, care, and piety. This public show of support is intended to sway public opinion in her favor. On the day of the trial, Dawn, in his first case, appears somewhat inexperienced, focusing on challenging the judge's authority, who seems intent on displaying his strength and power in front of the spectators. The judge orders a psychiatric evaluation of Candy before delivering the verdict. Jackie visits Candy at her home and inquires about the situation. Pat admits that he is uncertain about the unfolding events. Jackie questions whether he suspects his wife, to which Pat responds by mentioning the peculiarities he's observing, such as the bruises on Candy's body and a missing shoe. He also remarks on her composed demeanor throughout the ordeal, raising suspicions in his mind. Jackie suggests the possibility that Candy might be guilty in this case. Candy complies with her lawyer's advice and visits the psychiatrist for an evaluation. During the session, the psychiatrist induces a hypnotic state in Candy to delve into her subconscious. As the session progresses, Candy's emotions intensify, and she begins to express her strong feelings of hatred toward Katie, blaming her for ruining her life. The session becomes emotionally charged, particularly when Candy recalls a childhood incident in which she was involved in an accident and her mother violently silenced her in the hospital. After the hypnotherapy session, the psychiatrist concludes that Candy is not well-adjusted socially and does not pose any threat to society. On the following day, the trial commences. Candy follows her lawyer's instructions to dress in a manner that portrays her as weak and innocent in the eyes of the public. During the trial session, Dawn asserts that Candy was indeed responsible for Katie's death with the axe, but emphasizes that it was an act of self-defense. He urges the court not to jump to conclusions until the full story and circumstances are revealed. Following this session, Dawn approaches the priest and requests his assistance in preparing Candy for a televised speech in front of the public. Jackie visits Candy at her home and expresses her disbelief in Candy's claim that Katie initiated the attack. She informs Candy that she plans to testify against her in court, casting doubt on her self-defense narrative. The following day, the second trial session convenes, during which Alan is summoned for questioning. Dawn presents a series of questions aimed at establishing Candy's innocence. He inquires about Alan's relationship with Candy, and Alan explains that it is merely a platonic friendship with no intention of harming either party. Don then directs his attention to the murder weapon, the axe used to kill Katie. Alan reveals that it is stored in the garage, a detail that only Katie was aware of. This revelation supports the assertion that Katie initiated the attack, leaving Candy with no choice but to defend herself. The motive behind Katie's actions appears to be her suspicion that her husband was having an affair with Candy. The next trial session is set to take place, and witnesses who saw Katie's body on the day of the murder are called to testify. The defense aims to emphasize the brutality of the crime committed against Katie, describing the scene with blood everywhere and the baby crying loudly. Strangely, Candy appears oddly indifferent during this testimony. Witnesses who saw Candy at the church on that fateful day are summoned, and they confirm the clothes she was wearing, as Candy had informed them. Don's strategy successfully distorts the witnesses' recollections. During the trial, the lawyer inquires if Candy is taking any medications. She reveals that she is on sedatives. He advises her to stop taking them, so that she doesn't come across as emotionally numb in front of the jury, but rather as a relatable human being. Candy wants to appear strong and resolute in presenting the truth. Candy and Pat have a conversation at home, and she asks him about his thoughts regarding her now that he knows she is responsible for Katie's death. Pat responds by expressing his gratitude that Candy was not the one killed, because Katie was physically strong and capable of harming her. The next trial session begins, and the witnesses are called back to testify once more. Don questions them about the logic of someone planning a murder leaving behind fingerprints, the murder weapon, and their car parked outside the crime scene. The witnesses concur with Don's argument, acknowledging that such behavior does not appear premeditated but rather unplanned. An autopsy specialist takes the stand, providing a detailed account of Katie's injuries. He describes multiple wounds and cuts on her body, including a 5-centimeter cut on her hand and shoulder, deep arm wounds reaching the muscles, and 2 adjacent wounds on her thighs. Additionally, he notes facial injuries, complete atrophy of the left eye, a 10-centimeter cut on the right ear extending to the head, and a C-shaped cut on the upper part of her head, suggesting the impact came from behind. The specialist revealed that there were over 40 stab wounds distributed across Katie's body, any one of which could have caused unconsciousness or death. However, the fatal blow struck her cerebellum, a part of the brain. Don questions the autopsy specialist about whether any of the stab wounds occurred after Katie's death, to which the specialist mentions a simple stab wound on the shoulder area. Don then asks if there is any evidence to definitively establish whether Candy or Katie initiated the attack. The autopsy specialist responds that there is no such evidence. Don addresses the judge and the jury, emphasizing that there is no concrete evidence pointing to Candy as the instigator of the attack. Although Don appears shocked by the images he saw and the number of stab wounds inflicted, he manages to conceal his reaction from the court. Subsequently, the judge calls the first witness, and Don notices that Candy appears absent-minded, possibly due to the sedative pills. Don suggests postponing the session until the next day, but the judge declines and grants them only 10 minutes. When the 10 minutes elapse, Candy is summoned for questioning. Candy takes her seat and begins to recount the entire sequence of events that unfolded since Katie asked her about her relationship with Alan. She details how Katie brought the axe into the room and how she initially managed to calm her down. However, Katie's anger resurfaced, and she violently struck Candy on the head with the axe, severing her toes in the process. Fearing for her life, Candy managed to wrestle the axe from Katie and retaliated by striking her. The situation escalated further when Katie attempted to prevent Candy from leaving the house by blocking the door. A deadly struggle ensued, with both women making desperate attempts to harm each other. Candy eventually gained control of the axe, and in the heat of the moment, she delivered a fatal blow to Katie, striking her sternum abnormally and inflicting multiple stab wounds. Candy then abruptly awakens from her recollection, washes her face, and is left in shock over the traumatic events. Despite the horror of what transpired, she returned home and pretended as if nothing had happened. In the present moment, Dawn questions Candy about her feelings when she sees Katie holding the axe. She explains that she wasn't initially afraid because she didn't believe Katie intended to harm her. Even when Katie struck her on the head, Candy didn't think it was intentional and believed Katie might back off at any moment. Dawn then probes further, asking if Candy eventually defended herself out of fear that Katie would kill her. Candy admits that she initially tried to calm Katie down and didn't intend to defend herself until she saw Katie's determination to harm her. It was only then that she realized she had to protect herself and, in the heat of the moment, fought back until Katie died. The defense argues that Candy is a skilled liar who was able to deceive everyone, including her husband, into believing her innocence. They claim that the sheer number of stab wounds suggests there was no self-defense involved, and that Candy might be lying even now to protect herself. The case takes a complex turn as the defense attempts to challenge Candy's credibility and the true nature of the events that unfolded that fateful day. In the subsequent trial session, Dawn decides to call upon the psychiatrist to testify in Candy's favor. The psychiatrist elaborates on Candy's psychological condition, explaining that she suffers from schizoaffective disorder, a personality disorder rather than a mental illness. He highlights that Candy's strong belief that nothing happened is a defense mechanism to save face in front of others, which has effectively convinced those around her. Dawn questions the psychiatrist about the hypnosis session, during which it becomes evident that Candy did not initiate the attack. The psychiatrist explains that Candy's emotions during hypnosis were primarily driven by her fear of Katie and her desire for Katie to leave her alone. He further links the excessive number of stab wounds to deep-seated anger within Candy, stemming from a childhood incident. When she was just 4 years old, Candy's mother tried to silence her, warning her about what others might think if they heard her scream. This traumatic experience left a lasting impression on Candy, and the buried anger resurfaced when Katie attempted to force her into a situation against her will, leading to the tragic events that unfolded that day. Dawn's strategy is to present Candy as someone driven by fear and anger, reacting defensively rather than as a cold-blooded killer. The testimony of the psychiatrist seeks to establish a connection between Candy's past experiences and her actions during the altercation with Katie. In the courtroom, the defense vehemently objects to the psychiatrist's testimony, arguing that a single word could not possibly lead to such a heinous crime. The defense attorney asserts that this level of violence is illogical for a mere verbal dispute. He implores the jury to consider the gruesome scene, with Katie's body mutilated into 40 pieces and the infant crying in the background, while Candy shows no concern for the child's welfare and makes no attempt to contact the police. He paints a picture of a callous and uncaring individual. Dawn, Candy's lawyer, counters by appealing to the jury's sense of reason. He asks them to contemplate the lack of concrete evidence proving that Candy's actions were not in self-defense. He reminds them of the witnesses who attested to Candy's kindness and nonviolent nature, except in her interactions with Katie. Dawn suggests that Katie's hostility towards Candy and her desire for the priest to leave town might indicate that she initiated the attack. Dawn asks the jury to consider that Candy's actions were driven by the instinct for self-preservation, a fundamental human response. He argues that the turmoil began with Katie's assault and that Candy was merely defending herself. The session concludes with the judge announcing that the jury will determine whether Candy is innocent or guilty. As Dawn leaves the courtroom with Candy and her husband, his assistant rushes to inform him that the jury has reached a verdict and they are returning to court. The outcome of the trial hangs in the balance as the jury prepares to render its decision. The story reaches its conclusion with Candy being acquitted of killing Katie, a verdict that surprises and relieves her. Still, she is deeply affected by the traumatic events and decides to move to a new town with her family, seeking a fresh start and a chance to leave behind the painful memories that haunt them. Candy's life takes a different direction as she decides to study psychology, with a focus on helping people who are psychologically disturbed. She becomes a resource for adults dealing with psychological disorders and works with adolescents struggling with depression, alongside her elder daughter. Alan's life also takes a series of twists and turns. He marries, but the marriage ends in separation. He eventually enters into another marriage, but the story of his family remains complex, with his children being adopted by their grandparents, away from their father's tumultuous life. As for Don, he pursues a political career and runs for the position of the governor of the state. However, the story takes a dark turn as he takes his own life for reasons unknown, leaving behind a tragic and puzzling end to his story. The series, which is based on a true story, concludes, leaving viewers with a mix of emotions and reflecting on the complex and often unpredictable nature of human lives and relationships.